The darkness had texture. That was the first thing I learned during my weeks in captivity. The darkness wasn't just the absence of light, but something with weight and density that pressed against your skin like damp velvet. I'd stopped counting days after the first 2 weeks, when the pattern of meals became too irregular to track, when the difference between sleeping and waking blurred into one endless twilight of semi-consciousness. My wrists burned where the zip ties cut into them, secured to a pipe that ran along the concrete wall behind me. The industrial warehouse smelled of rust and old motor oil, with an underlying note of something chemical I couldn't identify. Every breath I took carried that scent deep into my lungs, a constant reminder of where I was and how far I'd fallen from my neat Portland apartment with its view of the Willamette River. I'd been a different person 6 weeks ago. Sloan Mercer, 26 years old, freelance graphic designer with a growing client list and a studio apartment I'd finally furnished the way I wanted. I remembered the morning it happened with crystalline clarity. I'd been meeting a potential client at a coffee shop in the Pearl District. The man who approached my table hadn't looked like a monster. He'd looked ordinary, forgettable, with kind eyes and an apologetic smile as he asked if I was Sloan Mercer. The details after that were fragments. A cloth over my face. The sweet, nauseating smell of chemicals. The world tilting sideways as my legs stopped working. Then nothing but darkness, and the growing realization that I'd made the worst mistake of my life by agreeing to meet a stranger from an email inquiry. Now I sat in this warehouse, my muscles cramping from limited movement, my throat raw from disuse. Darius, I'd learned my captor's name from his phone conversations, came sporadically. Sometimes once a day, sometimes not for what felt like days. He brought water and protein bars, speaking to me in a voice that remained eerily calm as he explained that I was insurance for some business transaction I couldn't begin to understand. The sound of footsteps outside the warehouse made me tense, my heart rate accelerating despite my exhaustion. But these footsteps were different. Multiple sets, confident and purposeful rather than Darius's careful, measured tread. Voices carried through the thin walls, male voices discussing square footage and property values with the casual authority of men used to making significant decisions. The warehouse door rolled open with a metallic shriek that made me flinch. Light flooded in, painfully bright after the perpetual dimness. I squeezed my eyes shut, turning my face away as my heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. Either rescue or something worse. After 6 weeks, I'd lost the ability to hope for the former. Christ! The single word cut through the space, sharp with shock, and barely contained fury. I forced my eyes open, squinting against the light. 3 figures stood silhouetted in the doorway. As my vision adjusted, I made out details. Expensive suits, polished shoes, the kind of presence that commanded attention without effort. The man who'd spoken stepped forward, and even in my disoriented state, I recognized power when I saw it. He was tall, perhaps 6'3", with dark hair shot through with silver at the temples. His face was all sharp angles and controlled intensity, the kind of face that revealed nothing unless he wanted it to. Everything about him spoke of wealth and authority, from the perfectly tailored charcoal suit to the way he moved with absolute confidence through the warehouse as if he owned it, which I realized with sinking dread he probably did. His steel-gray eyes locked onto mine, and I watched emotions flicker across his features too quickly to identify before his expression hardened into something cold and dangerous. He turned to one of the men behind him, his voice dropping to a lethal quiet that somehow felt more threatening than shouting. "Get Camden on the phone, now, and find out when Darius was last here." The man pulled out his phone immediately, speaking in rapid, clipped tones while the third man, younger, with the build of someone who spent serious time in a gym, moved to check the rest of the warehouse space. The tall man in the charcoal suit turned back to me, approaching slowly as if I were a wounded animal that might bolt. Perhaps that's exactly what I looked like. I could feel how I must appear, filthy, hollow-eyed, my designer jeans and silk blouse now stained and torn, my blonde hair matted and tangled. "My name is Kellen Thorne," he said, his voice losing some of its edge as he knelt a few feet away from me. "I'm going to get you out of here, but I need you to stay calm. Can you do that?" I managed a nod, though I wasn't sure I believed him. Men with that much power, that much controlled danger in their eyes, didn't rescue people out of the goodness of their hearts. There was always a price. He pulled a knife from his pocket, and I couldn't help the way I flinched backward, my zip-tied hands instinctively trying to shield myself. He froze, holding the knife up so I could see it clearly. "Just to cut the ties," he said, his tone gentler now. "I won't hurt you. You have my word." Words were cheap. I'd learned that lesson the hard way, but I also knew I had no choice. I held still as he moved closer, smelling expensive cologne mixed with something else. Leather and cedar, masculine and oddly comforting after weeks of industrial solvent and fear sweat. The knife cut through the zip ties in one smooth motion, and the sudden freedom made me gasp. My arms fell to my sides, muscles screaming at the change in position. Blood rushed back into my hands in a painful flood of pins and needles. I tried to move them and couldn't. My motor control temporarily shot. Kellen pocketed the knife and called over his shoulder. "Marcus, water, and get the car ready. We're leaving now." The younger man appeared with a bottle of water, which Kellen took and opened before offering it to me. I stared at it for a moment, my dehydrated brain struggling to process this simple act of kindness. When I finally reached for it, my hands shook so badly that water sloshed over the rim. "Easy," Kellen said, and before I could react, he'd steadied the bottle with his own hand, helping guide it to my lips. "Small sips. Your stomach probably can't handle much right now." The water tasted like salvation. I forced myself to follow his instructions, taking tiny sips, even though I wanted to gulp it down. As I drank, I studied him more carefully. Mid-40s, I guessed, with the kind of face that had probably been devastating when he was younger and had only grown more compelling with age. There was a scar along his jawline, faint but visible, and his hands, steady as they held the water bottle, bore the calluses of someone who'd done physical work at some point in his life. "Can you stand?" he asked when I'd drunk about half the bottle. I honestly didn't know. My legs had cramped days ago, and I'd been largely immobile except for the few times Darius had allowed me to stumble to a bucket in the corner that served as a bathroom. The thought of trying to walk made my eyes burn with frustrated tears. I'm not sure," I managed, my voice coming out hoarse and broken from disuse. Kellen didn't hesitate. He handed the water bottle to Marcus and then, with surprising gentleness for a man who radiated such controlled danger, he slipped one arm under my knees and the other around my back. "Then I'll carry you." "Wait." I started to protest, but my body betrayed me. The moment he lifted me, the warehouse tilted sideways and darkness crept in at the edges of my vision. I heard him curse softly, felt the solid warmth of his chest against my cheek, smelled that cedar and leather scent that would forever after remind me of this moment. "Stay with me," he commanded, his voice cutting through the fog, threatening to pull me under. "You're safe now. I've got you." Safe. The word felt foreign, impossible. I'd stopped believing in safety somewhere around week 3, when I'd realized that no one was coming to rescue me, that Darius had chosen his location too well, that I might die in this warehouse without anyone ever knowing what happened to me. But as Kellen carried me toward the light spilling through the warehouse doors, as the fresh air hit my face for the first time in weeks, something in my chest cracked open. Not hope, I wasn't ready for that yet, but maybe something like the possibility of hope. The chance that this nightmare might actually end. The world outside the warehouse was almost painfully bright. Spring in Portland, I realized distantly, noting the blooming cherry trees and the way the afternoon sun caught the water of the Willamette River in the distance. I'd lost 6 weeks of spring locked in that darkness. 6 weeks of my life, stolen by a man whose motivations I still didn't fully understand. A black SUV waited, its engine running and rear door open. Kellen slid me into the back seat with the same careful control he'd shown since finding me, then climbed in beside me. Marcus took the front passenger seat, while another man I hadn't noticed before got behind the wheel. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice still barely above a whisper. Kellen was already on his phone, barking orders to someone named Camden about security footage and property records and finding Darius before the day was out. He paused, covering the phone's microphone as he turned to me. "My place. You need medical attention, food, rest. We'll figure out the rest later." I stopped, unsure what I should do. Go to the police? Go home? Both options felt impossible, dangerous in ways I couldn't articulate. "My apartment has been compromised," Kellen said flatly. "Darius knew where you lived, knew your routine. Until we've dealt with him, you're not safe there." The casual way he spoke about dealing with Darius made ice spread through my veins. This man, this stranger who'd rescued me, was clearly not someone who operated within normal legal channels. The expensive suit, the warehouse he apparently owned in partnership with my captor, the way his men jumped to follow his orders without question, all of it painted a picture I'd been too traumatized to fully process until now. I'd been rescued by someone as dangerous as the man who'd taken me, maybe more dangerous, given the authority that rolled off him in waves. "Who are you?" I asked, the question coming out sharper than intended. "Really?" Kellen finished his phone call before answering, pocketing his phone and turning to study me with those unreadable gray eyes. "I'm someone who owns property throughout Portland and the surrounding areas. Someone who does business with people who sometimes make poor decisions. And someone who is currently very interested in understanding why my business partner thought it was acceptable to hold a civilian hostage in one of our shared warehouses." "Your business partner." I let the words hang between us, heavy with implication. "Darius Pavel." "Yes." Kellen's jaw tightened, the only sign of emotion he'd shown since his initial reaction to finding me. "We have certain ventures together. Property development, import-export, various investments. He answers to me in our organization's hierarchy, which means his actions reflect on me. Actions like kidnapping someone and holding them in a location that connects directly back to our operations." The clinical way he described it made my head spin. Why? Why did he take me? "That," Kellen said softly, "is precisely what I intend to find out." The SUV pulled onto a tree-lined street in the West Hills, Portland's wealthiest neighborhood. The houses here weren't just homes. They were estates, set back from the road behind security gates and manicured lawns. We turned into a driveway marked by stone pillars and an iron gate that opened automatically at our approach. The house that came into view made my breath catch despite my exhausted state. Modern architecture blended seamlessly with natural wood and stone, floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting the surrounding Douglas firs. It was the kind of place I might have designed graphics for in my former life, back when I created branding packages for luxury real estate developments and high-end hotels. That life felt impossibly distant now, separated from this moment by 6 weeks of captivity and the growing realization that I'd stumbled into something far more complicated than a simple kidnapping. The SUV stopped at the circular drive in front of the main entrance. Kellen was out and around to my side before I could even reach for the door handle. When he opened it, I tried to stand on my own, to salvage some shred of dignity. My legs buckled immediately. Kellen caught me before I could hit the ground, his arm banding around my waist with surprising strength. "Easy," he murmured, that gentle tone returning. "You've been through hell. Give yourself time." "I can walk," I insisted, even as I leaned heavily against him. "Just give me a second. You can walk tomorrow." He shifted his grip, clearly preparing to lift me again. "Right now you're going to let me help you, and you're going to see a doctor, and you're going to eat something that isn't a protein bar. Those are the only items on today's agenda." Understood? The command in his voice left no room for argument. Part of me, the part that had fought to survive these past 6 weeks, bristled at being ordered around. But another part, the part that was so tired I could barely think straight, wanted nothing more than to surrender control to someone who seemed capable of handling it. Understood, I whispered, and let him carry me into the house. The interior of Kellen's house matched the exterior's understated luxury. All clean lines, natural materials, and the kind of furniture that cost more than most people's cars. He carried me through a 2-story foyer where an abstract sculpture caught the afternoon light, down a hallway lined with what looked like original artwork, and into a bedroom suite that was larger than my entire apartment. The room was decorated in shades of cream and dove gray, with a king-sized bed that looked impossibly soft and inviting. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a garden where Japanese maples glowed red gold in the fading light. A door on the far wall presumably led to a bathroom. Kellen set me down carefully on the edge of the bed, and I immediately wanted to collapse backward onto those pristine linens. But I was too filthy, too aware of the grime coating my skin and clothes after 6 weeks in that warehouse. I can't. I gestured helplessly at myself. I'll ruin your sheets. Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, maybe, or approval at my consideration. The sheets can be replaced. You, on the other hand, cannot. But if it makes you feel better, there's a bathroom through that door, clean towels in the cabinet, and I'll have someone bring clothes that should fit. He moved toward the door, and sudden panic seized me. After weeks of isolation broken only by Darius's occasional visits, the thought of being alone again made my chest tighten painfully. Wait. The word came out sharper than intended, and Kellen paused, his hand on the doorframe. How long will you be gone? Understanding crossed his features. He pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, then pocketed it again. Dr. Ashford will be here in 20 minutes. I'll be just down the hall making calls. Marcus is stationed outside your door. You're not alone, Sloan. Not anymore. Hearing my name from his lips sent an unexpected shiver through me. I hadn't told him my name, which meant he'd already known who I was before finding me. The implications of that made my exhausted brain spin. How did you know? I asked. My name. Who I am. Kellen's expression remained neutral, but something in his posture shifted. We'll discuss that after you've been examined and had some rest. For now, focus on cleaning up and letting the doctor check you over. Everything else can wait. He left before I could protest, closing the door with a soft click that felt both comforting and confining. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment, trying to process everything that had happened in the last hour. Rescued. Safe. In a stranger's home. Dependent on a man whose business included partnerships with kidnappers. The absurdity of it might have made me laugh if I'd had the energy. Instead, I forced myself to stand, gripping the bedpost for support as my legs remembered how to bear weight. The bathroom was as luxurious as the bedroom. Marble countertops, a glass-enclosed shower large enough for 3 people, and a soaking tub positioned beneath a window that overlooked the gardens. I caught sight of myself in the mirror and immediately wished I hadn't. The woman staring back was almost unrecognizable. My face was hollow and pale, dark circles beneath eyes that looked too large for my gaunt features. My blonde hair hung in matted tangles past my shoulders. The silk blouse I'd worn to that coffee shop meeting was torn at the shoulder and stained with things I didn't want to identify. I looked like what I was, a victim. Broken. Helpless. The realization made something hot and furious ignite in my chest. I'd survived 6 weeks of captivity. I'd kept my sanity when Darius's visits became more erratic. When the darkness pressed in so hard I thought I might lose myself completely. I'd endured, and I was still here, still breathing, still capable of making decisions. Starting with getting clean. The shower took longer than it should have. partly because my muscles protested every movement, and partly because I kept having to stop and lean against the marble wall as waves of dizziness hit. I washed my hair 3 times, scrubbing until my scalp hurt, trying to wash away the memory of that warehouse along with the grime. By the time I emerged, wrapped in the plushest towel I'd ever felt, someone had left clothes on the bed. Soft gray leggings, an oversized cashmere sweater in pale blue, and undergarments still in their packages. Everything was in my size, down to the small detail of the bra's band and cup measurements. That detail sent ice through my veins despite the shower's warmth. Kellen hadn't just known my name. He'd known enough about me to have someone buy clothes in my exact size on short notice, which meant he'd had access to information about me, personal information, before ever setting foot in that warehouse. I was pulling the sweater over my head when a knock sounded at the door. "Come in," I called, my voice still raspy. The woman who entered was perhaps 50, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a neat bun and sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She carried a medical bag and had the brisk, competent air of someone who'd seen everything and wasn't easily impressed. "Miss Mercer," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Dr. Verity Ashford. Kellen asked me to examine you. How are you feeling?" I shook her hand, noting the firm grip and the calluses that suggested she still did hands-on work, despite clearly being successful enough to make house calls to places like this. "Like I've been tied up in a warehouse for 6 weeks." A small smile touched her lips. "Refreshingly honest. Let's see what we're dealing with." She gestured to the bed, and I sat while she pulled out various instruments. "I need to check your vitals, examine the damage to your wrists and ankles where you were restrained, and ask some questions that may be uncomfortable. Is that acceptable?" The fact that she asked, that she gave me agency over my own medical care after weeks of having no control over anything, made my throat tighten with unexpected emotion. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Dr. Ashford worked with efficient gentleness, her questions clinical but not cold. Blood pressure elevated but not dangerously so. Dehydration significant. Weight loss concerning. The marks on my wrists would scar, but should heal with proper care. No signs of sexual assault, thank God, though she examined me thoroughly to be certain. Throughout the examination, I found myself wondering about her relationship to Kellen. She'd come immediately, arrived within the promised 20 minutes carrying a medical bag that suggested she kept one ready for emergency calls. She showed no surprise at being asked to examine a recently rescued kidnapping victim, and she asked no questions about how I'd ended up in Kellen's care. "You'll need to eat small meals frequently for the next few days," Dr. Ashford said as she packed up her equipment. "Your stomach has shrunk, and we need to build your strength back gradually. I'm prescribing antibiotics for the infection starting in those wrist wounds, and a mild sedative to help you sleep. The nightmares will likely be intense for a while." "How did you know about the nightmares?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Because I've treated other people Kellen has. Brought home." She met my eyes directly, and I saw something there. Sympathy, maybe, or a warning I couldn't quite interpret. "He has a tendency to collect strays. Usually they're better off for it, though the adjustment period can be difficult." "I'm not a stray," I said, more sharply than intended. "I'm not staying here. Once I've recovered enough." "You'll go where?" "Doctor." Ashford's tone remained gentle, but her words cut through my protest. "Back to your apartment where your captor found you? To family?" She paused, consulting something on a tablet she'd pulled from her bag. "Your parents passed away in a car accident when you were 22. No siblings, no close relatives in the area. Your emergency contact is still listed as a college roommate who moved to Seattle 3 years ago." The casual recitation of my personal history made me feel exposed in a way the medical examination hadn't. "You've researched me." "Kellen has researched you," she corrected. "Quite thoroughly, from what I understand. He doesn't take unnecessary risks, Miss Mercer. If you're under his protection, he needs to know every variable. Under his protection. The phrase settled over me like a weighted blanket, simultaneously comforting and suffocating. I didn't ask for his protection, I said quietly. Dr. Ashford's expression softened. No, you didn't. But you have it nonetheless. And given the alternatives, I'd suggest accepting that reality, at least temporarily. She closed her bag and stood. I'll be back tomorrow to check on you. In the meantime, get some rest. Your body needs time to recover, even if your mind is fighting against it. After she left, I sat on the bed, feeling the weight of exhaustion pressing down on my shoulders. The soft clothes, the clean skin, the promise of food and safety. It all felt surreal, like I'd stepped from one nightmare into a fever dream. A different knock came at the door, this one accompanied by a warm, grandmotherly voice. Miss Sloane, I'm bringing you some soup. May I come in? Yes, I called, and the door opened to reveal a woman who looked to be in her late 60s, with white hair in a neat bun and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. She carried a tray with a bowl of soup that smelled like heaven, along with crackers and herbal tea. I'm Bertie Kensington, dear. I manage the household here. She set the tray on the bedside table and studied me with the kind of thorough assessment only grandmothers could get away with. You look better already, though that's not saying much given what you've been through. Kellen filled me in on the basics. I watched as she fussed with the tray, arranging everything within easy reach. How long have you worked for him? Oh, I don't work for Kellen, sweetheart. I work with him. She smiled at my confused expression. I've known that boy since he was 14 years old, making deliveries for his father's import business. When his father passed and Kellen took over, he asked me to help him run his home because, Lord knows, he can manage an entire criminal enterprise but can't remember to buy milk. The casual mention of a criminal enterprise should have shocked me. Instead, I found myself almost grateful for the honesty. At least Bertie wasn't pretending Kellen was anything other than what he was. You're very open about what he does, I observed. Bertie settled into the chair beside the bed, clearly in no hurry to leave. No point in dancing around it. You're smart enough to have figured out the basics already, and lies only make things more complicated. She gestured to the soup. Now eat that before it gets cold. Chicken broth, nothing too heavy. We'll work up to real food over the next few days. I picked up the spoon, my hand trembling slightly. The first taste was almost overwhelming, salt and warmth, and the kind of complex flavor that came from hours of careful preparation. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed taste, real taste, after weeks of protein bars and lukewarm water. Good girl, Bertie said approvingly. Slow sips, just like Dr. Ashford recommended. You'll feel human again soon enough. Between spoonfuls of soup, I worked up the courage to ask the question that had been building since Dr. Ashford's visit. How much does Kellen know about me? Specifically, I mean. Bertie's expression grew thoughtful. Enough to understand who you are and what you might need. He had Camden, that's his head of operations, run a thorough background check as soon as he realized Darius was holding someone in that warehouse. Standard procedure when civilians get tangled up in our business. Our business. The way she said it, so matter of fact, as if kidnapping and criminal enterprises were just another day at the office. I'm not tangled up in anything, I protested. I was taken, held against my will. That doesn't make me part of whatever world you and Kellen operate in. Doesn't it? Bertie's voice remained gentle, but her eyes were shrewd. The moment Darius took you, you became part of this world. The moment Kellen found you and brought you here, you became his responsibility. Like it or not, dear, you're in this now. The only question is whether you fight it every step of the way, or learn to work with the reality of your situation. I set down the spoon, my appetite vanishing despite the delicious soup. You're saying I'm a prisoner here. just a more comfortable one. I'm saying you're protected here, Birdie corrected. There's a difference, though I understand why it might not feel like one right now. But I've watched Kellen operate for nearly 30 years, and I can tell you this. When he decides someone is under his protection, he takes that responsibility seriously. You're safer in this house than you would be anywhere else in Portland right now. Because of Darius. Because of Darius. And because of whoever hired Darius to take you in the first place. Birdie's expression grew grave. You don't think he acted alone, do you? That he just randomly decided to kidnap a graphic designer and hold her hostage for 6 weeks? The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. I'd been so focused on Darius, on surviving each day in that warehouse, that I hadn't thought beyond the immediate threat. You're saying someone hired him to take me? That's what Kellen believes, and his instincts are usually correct, which is why Camden is currently tearing through every database and surveillance camera in the city, trying to figure out who and why. Birdie stood, collecting the tray. Finish the soup, dear. You need your strength. Tomorrow will bring answers, I expect, and you'll need to be clear-headed to hear them. After she left, I forced myself to drink the rest of the soup, each spoonful an act of will rather than desire. My mind raced with implications I hadn't considered. If Darius had been hired, if there was someone else behind my kidnapping, then Kellen was right. I couldn't simply go home and resume my life. Someone had wanted me taken. Someone might still want whatever Darius had been holding me for. The thought made my hands shake so badly I had to set down the spoon. A soft knock, different from the others, came at the door. Kellen's voice followed. Sloan, may I come in? I pulled the cashmere blanket from the foot of the bed around my shoulders, suddenly feeling exposed despite being fully clothed. Yes. He entered, having changed from his suit into dark jeans and a black sweater that somehow made him look both more approachable and more dangerous. He carried a laptop and a file folder, which he set on the desk near the window before turning to face me. How are you feeling? He asked, his gray eyes scanning my face with the same intensity I'd seen in the warehouse. Like my entire life just became exponentially more complicated, I admitted. A small smile touched his lips, the first genuine expression of humor I'd seen from him. That's fair and accurate. He gestured to the chair Birdie had vacated. May I? I nodded, watching as he settled into the chair with the kind of controlled grace that suggested either martial arts training or years of moving through the world as a predator who never fully relaxed. I need to tell you what we've learned, he said, opening the file folder. It's not pleasant, and you may have questions I can't answer yet, but you deserve to know what you're dealing with. Birdie said someone hired Darius to take me. Yes. Kellen pulled out several photographs, spreading them on the bed between us. 3 weeks before you were taken, you completed a branding project for a company called Meridian Holdings. Do you remember them? I nodded slowly. Real estate development. They wanted a full branding package for a new luxury condo project downtown. It was one of my biggest clients. Meridian Holdings is a shell corporation, Kellen said flatly. A very sophisticated one, designed to launder money for several competing organizations in the city. The man who hired you, Marcus Chen, was skimming from those operations. When his bosses discovered the theft, they needed to find out what he'd told you, what information you might have access to through the design files he'd given you. My hands clenched in the blanket. I didn't know anything. The files were just marketing materials, logo concepts, color palettes. They didn't know that. Kellen interrupted gently. Chen disappeared before they could question him. You were the next logical target, someone he'd worked with closely, someone who might have seen something in his files or communications that would lead them to the missing money. So they hired Darius to take me. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture that made my stomach churn. And Darius used one of your warehouses to hold me, Which means I'm implicated in your kidnapping through association, Kellen finished. Even though I had no knowledge of it. Even though Darius violated every agreement we had by using our shared property for unauthorized activities. To the people who hired him, I'm part of the problem. The full scope of my situation finally crystallized. I wasn't just the victim of a kidnapping. I was a loose end in a larger criminal conspiracy. And my rescue by Kellen had made me his problem as well. What happens now? I asked, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. Kellen leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes locked on mine with an intensity that made it impossible to look away. Now I find Darius and everyone involved in putting you in that warehouse. I extract the full story, who hired him, how much they paid, what they wanted from you. Then I make it very clear that you're under my protection, and anyone who touches you answers to me. The cold promise in his voice should have frightened me. Instead, I felt a strange sense of safety settling over me for the first time since waking up in that warehouse. And then, I pressed, then you stay here, where I can ensure your safety, until the situation is resolved. There it was, the cage reforming around me, this time lined with cashmere and justified by protection rather than malice. For how long? I asked. Kellen's expression was grave. As long as it takes. The days that followed my rescue blurred together in a haze of medical checks, small meals, and long hours of sleep interrupted by nightmares that left me gasping in the dark. Each time I woke, disoriented and terrified, I'd hear a soft knock at my door, and either Bertie or Kellen would appear to remind me where I was, and that I was safe. On the fourth night, when I jerked awake from a dream where the warehouse walls were closing in, it was Kellen who came. He didn't turn on the overhead light, just the small lamp on the bedside table, and settled into the chair he'd claimed as his usual spot during our conversations. The same dream? He asked quietly. I nodded, pulling my knees to my chest beneath the blankets. I can't breathe. The walls keep moving closer, and I can't get free of the restraints, and my voice broke, and I pressed my palms against my eyes, furious at the weakness. It will get better, Kellen said, and something in his tone made me look up. Not quickly, and not in a straight line, but it will get better. You sound like you're speaking from experience. He was silent for a long moment, his gray eyes distant with memory. When I was 17, my father's rivals kidnapped me, held me in a shipping container at the docks for 9 days. They wanted him to give up territory, to step back from operations that were cutting into their profits. I stared at him, seeing him differently in the lamplight, not just the powerful, controlled man who'd rescued me, but someone who understood the specific hell of captivity. What happened? I asked. My father negotiated my release. Then he systematically dismantled their entire organization over the following 2 years. Kellen's expression remained neutral, but I could hear the old pain beneath the words. I had nightmares for a year afterward, panic attacks in enclosed spaces, a complete inability to trust anyone outside our immediate circle. Did it go away? The fear? No, he said honestly. But I learned to function despite it, to use it even. Fear can be clarifying if you don't let it paralyze you. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, and I found myself studying him more carefully. In his casual clothes, without the armor of his suits, he looked more human. The silver at his temples caught the lamplight, and I noticed fine lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more than I'd seen evidence of. Why are you being so kind to me? The question emerged before I could think better of it. I'm nothing to you, a complication in your business dealings. You could have called the police. Let them handle this. Kellen's laugh was soft and without real humor. The police in this city couldn't protect you from what's coming. Half of them are on someone's payroll, Not mine, to be clear, but one of my rivals. And you're not nothing, Sloane. You're an innocent person who got caught in a world that should never have touched you. But you're keeping me here, making decisions about my life without asking what I want. What do you want? He challenged, leaning forward. To go back to your apartment where Marcus Chen's people know you live? To resume your freelance work where clients might be fronts for criminal enterprises? To pretend the last 6 weeks didn't happen and hope no one comes looking for you? Each question struck like a physical blow, because he was right. I had no safe options, no clear path forward that didn't involve looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life. I want control over my own life, I said finally, even if that life is more limited than before. Something shifted in Kellen's expression. Respect, maybe, or a kind of recognition. Then let's negotiate. You tell me what you need, within the boundaries of keeping you safe, and I'll do my best to accommodate it. The offer surprised me. I'd expected continued commands, decisions made for my own good without my input. This felt different, a genuine attempt to give me agency within an impossible situation. I need to work, I said immediately. I can't just sit here day after day with nothing to do but think about that warehouse. I need purpose, productivity, something that makes me feel like myself again. Kellen nodded. Your laptop and external drives were recovered from your apartment. Camden's team swept them for malware and tracking software. They're clean. You can set up a workspace here. The library on the second floor has good light and a desk. Work remotely, maintain your client relationships, but everything gets vetted through Camden first to ensure there's no connection to the people who targeted you. It was more than I'd expected, and the fact that they'd already recovered my work equipment suggested Kellen had anticipated this request. What else? I want to know everything you learn about why I was taken. No filtering the information because you think I can't handle it. If I'm in this situation, I deserve to understand it fully. His jaw tightened slightly, but he nodded. Agreed. Though I reserve the right to deliver particularly difficult news when you're in a place to process it, not in the middle of the night when you're already dealing with nightmares. Fair enough. I pulled the blanket more tightly around my shoulders. And I want to be part of the solution. When you find Darius, when you confront whoever hired him, I want to be there. I need to face them. No. The word was flat, absolute. You said we could negotiate. Negotiation has limits, Kellen cut in, his voice hardening. I won't put you in a room with the people who authorized your kidnapping. That's non-negotiable, Sloane. You can hate me for it if you want, but I won't compromise on your physical safety. I wanted to argue, to insist that I needed the closure of confronting my captors, but the steel in his eyes told me this was a line he wouldn't cross. Fine, I said after a long moment, but I want details afterward. What was said, what you learned, what happens to them. All of it. Done. Kellen stood, moving to the window where the first hints of dawn were lightening the sky beyond the gardens. Camden should have the full picture within a few days. We've been tracking Darius's movements, his communications, his financial transactions. He can't hide forever. And when you find him? Kellen's reflection in the window was cold, predatory. Then we have a conversation about consequences, and I recover whatever information he extracted from you during your captivity, if any. That brought me up short. He asked questions about Marcus Chen, about the files he'd given me, about whether I'd noticed anything unusual in our communications. My voice dropped. I didn't know anything useful. I told him that repeatedly, but I don't think he believed me. Did he hurt you to get answers? The question was carefully neutral, but I could hear the tension beneath it. He threatened to, showed me tools, described what he could do, but he never actually... I couldn't finish the sentence. Kellen turned from the window, his expression unreadable. That restraint probably saved his life. If he'd seriously harmed you, I wouldn't be planning to question him. I'd be planning a funeral. The casual promise of lethal violence should have disturbed me. Instead, I felt a dark satisfaction that someone was willing to avenge what had been done to me, even if that someone operated outside any legal framework. "Tell me about Marcus Chen," I said, needing to understand the full picture. "The man who started all this." Kellen returned to his chair, and for the next hour, he laid out the story. Marcus Chen had been a mid-level money launderer, good at his job, but ambitious beyond his position. He'd seen an opportunity in the competing interests of 3 criminal organizations, all using Meridian Holdings as a front, and he'd skimmed $2 million over 6 months by manipulating accounts and shifting money between shell corporations. When his theft was discovered, Chen had disappeared with remarkable efficiency, new identity, offshore accounts, probably a new life in a country without extradition treaties. But he'd left behind loose ends, including a graphic designer he'd worked with closely for several weeks. "They thought you were his girlfriend," Kellen said, "or at least his confidant, someone he might have shared information with, intentionally or otherwise. When they couldn't find him, they went after the next best thing. But I wasn't. The injustice of it burned. He was just a client, professional, polite, but I never even had coffee with him outside of project meetings. They didn't know that. And by the time Darius realized you genuinely knew nothing useful, he'd already committed to holding you. He was getting paid weekly to keep you contained until Chen surfaced or his employers decided you weren't worth the investment. The cold calculation of it made me feel ill. I'd been a business decision, a line item in someone's operational budget. "How much?" I asked. How much was I worth? $10,000 a week. Kellen's voice was flat. $60,000 total by the time I found you. $60,000. That's what my suffering had been worth to faceless people who'd never even met me. The number felt simultaneously too large and insultingly small. "I want them to pay," I said quietly. "Not just Darius. Everyone involved. I want them to face consequences for what they did." Kellen studied me for a long moment, and I saw approval in his eyes. "You're stronger than you look, Sloan Mercer. That's good. You'll need that strength for what's coming." Before I could ask what he meant, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his entire demeanor changed, tension replacing the relative relaxation of our conversation. "What is it?" I asked. Camden found Darius. Kellen was already moving toward the door. "He's holed up in a motel near the airport, probably planning to run. We need to move now before he disappears." "I'm coming with you," I said, throwing off the blankets. "Absolutely not." Kellen paused at the door. "This is not a negotiation, Sloan. You stay here, where it's safe. Birdie will be with you, and Marcus is on security detail. I'll be back with answers." "Kellen, I promised I'd keep you safe. That promise means nothing if I bring you into the field." His expression softened slightly. "Trust me. Let me handle this part." He was gone before I could argue further, leaving me standing in the middle of the bedroom, torn between frustration at being left behind and a strange sense of anticipation. Finally, we were moving toward answers, toward justice, of a kind. I didn't go back to sleep. Instead, I showered, dressed in the comfortable clothes that had been provided, and made my way downstairs to find Birdie already in the kitchen, preparing breakfast as if this were any normal morning. "He went after Darius," I said without preamble. Birdie looked up from the eggs she was scrambling, her expression knowing. "Yes, dear. Camden called about 20 minutes ago. These things move quickly once they start moving. How long will it take?" "For Kellen to get Darius to talk?" "Not long. He has ways of being very persuasive." She plated the eggs and gestured for me to sit at the kitchen island. "Eat. You'll need your strength. When Kellen comes back with the full story, you'll want to be clear-headed to hear it." I picked at the eggs, my appetite minimal despite their perfect seasoning. What happens after, when we know everything? Birdie's expression grew serious. That depends on what they learn. But knowing Kellen, he'll want to send a message to Darius's employers, to anyone else who might think you're vulnerable. The message will be clear. Sloan Mercer is under Kellen Thorne's protection, and there are severe consequences for touching his people. His people. I'd become one of Kellen's people without ever agreeing to the designation. The thought should have rankled more than it did. We were finishing breakfast when the front door opened. Kellen strode in, his expression grim, Camden a half-step behind him. Both men looked tense, wired with adrenaline that hadn't fully dissipated. Camden was perhaps 45, lean and compact with sharp features and eyes that missed nothing. He nodded to me with professional courtesy, before turning to Kellen. "I'll compile the full report," he said. "Have it to you within the hour." After Camden left, Kellen sank onto one of the bar stools, accepting the coffee Birdie poured without being asked. He looked exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness, the kind of weariness that came from dealing with humanity's worst impulses. "Tell me," I said, moving to stand across the island from him. "Everything." Kellen met my eyes, and I saw something in his expression that made my breath catch, a mixture of anger and something almost like apology. "You were right to want them to pay," he said quietly, "because what they did to you was just the beginning of what they'd planned." Kellen's words hung in the air between us, heavy with implications I wasn't sure I wanted to understand. Birdie had quietly excused herself, leaving us alone in the kitchen where morning light streamed through the windows and made everything look deceptively peaceful. "What do you mean, just the beginning?" I asked, gripping the edge of the counter to steady myself. He took a long drink of his coffee before answering, as if fortifying himself for what he had to say. Darius was cooperative once he understood his situation. Very cooperative. According to him, you were never meant to be released. The kitchen tilted slightly. I'd known, on some level, that my captivity wouldn't have ended well. But hearing it stated so baldly made the reality crash over me in waves. "They were going to kill me," I said, the words flat and emotionless. "Once they decided I didn't have useful information." "Eventually, yes. But first..." Kellen's jaw tightened, and I saw fury banked beneath his controlled exterior. "First, they planned to use you as leverage against Chen if he ever surfaced. And if he didn't surface within 3 months, you'd be sold to one of their overseas contacts who specializes in acquisitions." The word hung between us, clinical and terrible in its implications. I'd read enough, seen enough crime dramas to know what that meant. Human trafficking. A life spent as property, passed between owners, existing only for others' use. My legs gave out. I sank onto the bar stool beside Kellen, my hands shaking so badly I had to clasp them in my lap to hide the tremor. "Sloan." Kellen's hand covered both of mine, warm and solid and real. "Breathe. You're safe. That's not going to happen. I won't let it happen." "You can't promise that," I whispered. "You're just one man, no matter how much power you have. If they want me badly enough, then they'll have to go through me, through Camden, through every person in my organization." His voice was steel wrapped in silk. "I've already sent word through appropriate channels. Sloan Mercer is under my protection. Anyone who touches you, threatens you, or even looks at you wrong answers directly to me. And I promise you, no one in this city wants that conversation." I stared at our joined hands, his so much larger than mine, scarred across the knuckles in ways that spoke of a violent past. "Why? Why do you care so much? I'm nobody to you." "You were nobody to me," he corrected gently. Past tense. "The moment I found you in that warehouse, you became my responsibility." That's how this works in my world, Sloane. When you claim someone as yours, when you extend protection, it's absolute. There's no halfway. His words echoed Bertie's from days earlier, and I finally understood what they'd both been trying to tell me. In Kellen's world, protection wasn't a temporary measure or a casual favor. It was a binding commitment, one that came with obligations and expectations on both sides. "What do you want from me in return?" I asked, needing to understand the terms of this arrangement. "There's always a price. What's yours?" Kellen's expression grew thoughtful. He withdrew his hand from mine, and I immediately missed the warmth. "What I want is for you to stop fighting me at every turn. To accept that, for now, this is the safest place for you to be. To trust that I have your best interests at heart, even when my decisions don't align with what you think you want." "That's not a small ask," I said. "You're asking me to surrender control over my entire life. I'm asking you to be smart about your survival." He turned on his stool to face me fully. "In 3 weeks, we'll have neutralized the immediate threat. Darius and his employers will understand you're off limits, and the message will spread through the usual networks. At that point, you'll have more freedom. But right now, while the situation is still fluid, I need you to cooperate." 3 weeks, 21 days. It seemed simultaneously like an eternity, and no time at all. "And then what?" I pressed. "After 3 weeks, I just go back to my normal life?" "You'll never go back to your normal life," Kellen said bluntly. "That life ended the moment Marcus Chen chose you as his graphic designer. But you can build a new normal. A safer one, if you're willing to be smart about it." "Ani?" The finality of it hurt more than I'd expected. My little studio apartment with its view of the river, my favorite coffee shop where the barista knew my order, my Tuesday night life drawing class at the community center. All of it felt impossibly distant now, like remembering someone else's life. "I need some air," I said abruptly, standing. "Can I? Is the garden safe?" Kellen nodded. "The property is fully secured. Motion sensors, cameras, guards at the perimeter. You can go anywhere on the grounds. Just stay within sight of the house." I needed no further encouragement. I slipped out through the kitchen's French doors onto a flagstone terrace that overlooked extensive gardens. The May morning was perfect, not too warm, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of roses and lavender. I walked until I found a stone bench beneath a Japanese maple, far enough from the house to feel alone but still visible from the windows. My mind spun with everything Kellen had told me, trying to process the full scope of what I'd narrowly escaped. I'd been hours away from a fate worse than death. If Kellen hadn't chosen that specific day to inspect properties with Darius, if he'd trusted his partner enough not to check the warehouse personally, if he'd seen me and decided I wasn't his problem. The ifs piled up until I couldn't breathe under their weight. I don't know how long I sat there before footsteps on the flagstones announced someone's approach. I looked up to find Kellen carrying 2 mugs of what smelled like herbal tea. "Bertie thought you might need this," he said, offering one. "Chamomile with honey. Good for shock." I accepted the mug gratefully, wrapping my hands around its warmth. Kellen settled onto the bench beside me, close enough to offer comfort, far enough to avoid crowding. We sat in silence for several minutes, and I found myself studying him in profile. There was a hardness to him, certainly, a controlled violence that never fully went dormant. But there was also a strange gentleness in how he'd handled me since that first moment in the warehouse, a care that seemed at odds with his reputation. "Tell me about your father," I said suddenly. "You mentioned he ran an import business." Kellen's mouth quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile. "My father ran several businesses, most of them legitimate. The import company was his cover for moving goods that customs might have frowned upon. He was old school, organized, methodical, ruthless when necessary, but never cruel without cause. And you took over when he died. When I was 25. Too young, really. But there was no one else. My mother had passed years earlier, and I was an only child. The organization either went to me or dissolved. He sipped his tea, gazed distant with memory. I thought about walking away, going legitimate, leaving this life behind. What stopped you? Responsibility, loyalty, the knowledge that if I walked away, the vacuum would be filled by someone far worse. He glanced at me. Sometimes the moral choice isn't between good and evil. It's between bad and worse. I chose to be the kind of bad that has rules, limits, lines that don't get crossed. Like not hurting civilians. Like not hurting civilians, he agreed. Like protecting people who get caught in this world through no fault of their own. Like ensuring that the violence inherent in this business stays contained, doesn't spill over into innocent lives any more than absolutely necessary. I wanted to point out the contradiction, that his business, by its very nature, created situations where innocent people got hurt. But I'd seen enough of his genuine care for my well-being to know that he struggled with that contradiction himself. What happened to Darius? I asked, changing the subject. Kellen's expression hardened. He's alive, if that's what you're asking. He gave us everything we needed. Names, organizational structure, payment trails, the location where Chen's employers meet to discuss operations. That cooperation bought him his life. But he'll never work in this city again, and he'll bear the consequences of betraying my trust for the rest of his days. I didn't ask for specifics. Some things were better left unknown. And his employers? The people who paid him to take me? That, Kellen said softly, is what we're handling next. Camden is coordinating with some of my more diplomatic associates. By the end of the week, they'll understand that touching you was a mistake that won't be repeated. The casual promise of retribution should have disturbed me. Instead, I felt a fierce satisfaction that someone was finally making my captors face consequences for what they'd done. We finished our tea in companionable silence, and I realized with some surprise that I felt comfortable here. Not safe. I wasn't sure I'd ever truly feel safe again, but comfortable in Kellen's presence in a way I hadn't expected. I have a proposition for you, Kellen said eventually, setting his empty mug on the bench between us. A way for you to start building that new normal we talked about. I turned to face him fully, curious despite my wariness. I'm listening. I own a property management company, fully legitimate, pays taxes, the whole thing. They handle residential and commercial properties throughout the Pacific Northwest. One of their services is working with designers to stage properties for sale or lease. He paused. They could use someone with your skills. The pay would be better than your freelance rate. The work would be steady, and it would all be thoroughly vetted to ensure no connection to anything illegal. It was a lifeline, an opportunity to reclaim some sense of purpose and productivity. But it was also another way Kellen would be woven into the fabric of my life, making me dependent on him for income as well as safety. You'd be my boss, I said, testing the implications. Camden would be your boss. I'm several levels removed from daily operations. You'd be an employee like any other, with the same expectations and benefits. His gray eyes held mine. But yes, ultimately, the money comes from my organization. If that's a problem... It's not, I interrupted, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. It's practical, and I need work, need to feel productive again. When would I start? Whenever you're ready. This week, next month. There's no pressure. The position will be there when you want it. The flexibility, the lack of pressure, felt like another gift in a string of unexpected kindnesses. I was beginning to understand that this was how Kellen operated, not through force or intimidation, but through carefully structured incentives that made compliance feel like choice. A phone buzzed, and Kellen pulled his from his pocket, frowning at the screen. I need to take this. Camden's found something. He stepped away toward the garden's far end, his voice dropping too low for me to hear the conversation. I watched him pace among the roses, his body language growing increasingly tense as the call progressed. When he returned, his expression was grim. "We have a problem." My stomach dropped. "What kind of problem?" "The people who hired Darius aren't backing down. They're insisting you still have information they need, that Chen must have told you something before he disappeared." Kellen's jaw tightened. "They've put a bounty out. 50,000 for information on your current location. 100,000 for successful delivery." The numbers made my vision swim. That's insane. I don't know anything. I never knew anything." "I believe you, but they don't, or they don't care." He moved closer, and I saw genuine concern in his eyes. "We need to adjust our security protocols. You'll have personal protection any time you leave the property. Marcus or one of Camden's other men. The garden access is now restricted to supervised visits only. And we're moving up the timeline on confronting Chen's employers." "How soon?" "Tonight. We have a meeting location and we have leverage they want. Time to end this before it escalates further." I stood, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. I want to be there. I want to look them in the eyes and tell them I don't have their information. "Sloan." "No," I cut him off. "You said you'd give me control where it was safe to do so. This is important to me, Kellen. I need to face them. Need them to see that I'm not afraid anymore." Something shifted in his expression, respect mixed with concern. "It could be dangerous. These aren't people who respond well to confrontation. I survived 6 weeks in that warehouse. I can survive one meeting." I stepped closer, invading his space in a way I hadn't dared before. "Please, let me have this." Kellen studied me for a long moment, and I could see him weighing risks against benefits, control against my need for agency. Finally, he nodded slowly. "You can attend the meeting, but you follow my instructions exactly. Stay where I tell you to stay. Leave when I tell you to leave. At the first sign of threat, Marcus will get you out. Those are my terms. Non-negotiable." "Agreed," I said immediately, relief flooding through me. "Then we have preparations to make. Camden will brief you on what to expect, what to say, what not to say." He checked his watch. "The meeting is at 8. We leave here at 7. As we walked back toward the house, I felt a strange sense of anticipation building. Finally, I'd face the people who'd turned my life into a nightmare. Finally, I'd have answers. And finally, I'd understand exactly what Kellen Thorne's protection really meant in a world where violence was currency and power was the only law that mattered. The hours between Kellen's announcement and our departure for the meeting passed in a blur of preparation. Camden arrived at the house mid-afternoon, carrying a tablet and wearing the expression of someone about to deliver a difficult briefing. We gathered in Kellen's study, a room I hadn't seen before, all dark wood and leather furniture with walls lined by books that looked actually read rather than decorative. Camden pulled up several photographs on his tablet, spreading them across Kellen's desk. "These are the 3 principals we're meeting tonight," he said, his voice clipped and professional. "Viktor Konstantin, Dmitry Volkov, and Alexei Petrov. They're the operational heads of the syndicate that hired Darius, collectively known as the Triad because of their power-sharing arrangement." I studied the faces. All 3 men appeared to be in their 50s or 60s, with the hard-worn features of people who'd spent decades in a violent business. Viktor had a cruel mouth and dead eyes. Dmitry's face was heavily scarred. Alexei looked almost grandfatherly, which somehow made him more disturbing rather than less. "They're going to be angry," Camden continued. "Kellen's interference cost them time and money. They view Darius as their property, and Kellen's extraction of him was, from their perspective, theft. But Darius was using Kellen's property without permission, I protested. That gives Kellen more claim than they have. Camden's mouth quirked in something almost like a smile. Logic and criminal enterprise don't always align. In their view, they hired Darius for a job. Where he chose to complete that job is his business, not theirs. What do they want? Kellen asked, leaning against the desk with his arms crossed. 2 things. First, they want Sloane back. They still believe she has information about Chen's location or the stolen money. Camden glanced at me apologetically. Second, they want compensation for the disruption to their operations. They're proposing $1 million to cover their costs and inconvenience. The number made me feel sick. My kidnapping had become a business transaction, with me as the commodity being negotiated over. They're getting neither, Kellen said flatly. Sloane stays under my protection, and I don't pay for other people's incompetence. What's our leverage? Camden pulled up another image, this time of documents covered in numbers and account information. Their financial records. Every transaction, every account, every shell corporation they've used to move money in the last 5 years. I've already shared samples with them to prove authenticity. If we release the full package to federal investigators, the triad will spend the next decade in prison. How did you get that? I asked, impressed despite myself. Darius was more cooperative than they probably anticipated, Camden said dryly. He kept meticulous records as insurance against being thrown under the bus. When Kellen made it clear that cooperation was his only path to survival, he gave up everything. Kellen nodded, apparently satisfied with the leverage. What about security for the meeting? Neutral ground, the warehouse district, specifically the old Peterson Steel facility. It's been abandoned for years, multiple exits, good sightlines. I'll have 6 men positioned throughout the building. They won't intervene unless things go south, but they'll be ready. Camden turned to me. Marcus will stay with you at all times. If Kellen gives the signal, Marcus gets you out immediately. Don't argue, don't hesitate. Just go. I nodded, my mouth dry with anticipation and fear. This was what I'd asked for, the chance to face my tormentors. But now that it was real, I felt the weight of what I was walking into. After Camden left, Kellen poured himself a scotch from the decanter on his sidebar. He offered me one, but I shook my head. I needed to be clear-headed. Are you sure about this? He asked, studying me over the rim of his glass. It's not too late to change your mind. You can stay here. Wait for me to return with answers. I'm sure. I moved to the window, looking out at the garden where we'd shared tea that morning. It felt like days ago, rather than hours. I need to do this, Kellen, for myself. Why? What do you think facing them will accomplish? I considered the question, trying to articulate feelings I'd barely processed myself. For 6 weeks, I was helpless. A victim. I couldn't control what happened to me, couldn't fight back, couldn't even understand why it was happening. Tonight, I can look them in the eyes and tell them they don't get to define me, that I'm not broken by what they did. Kellen set down his glass and came to stand beside me at the window. You're not broken, Sloane. Battered, certainly. Traumatized, understandably. But not broken. I've seen broken people, and you're not one of them. The confidence in his voice, the certainty with which he said it, made something warm unfurl in my chest. How can you be so sure? Because broken people don't fight for control over their own lives. They don't negotiate terms or ask to face their captors. They survive, but they don't thrive. He turned to face me fully. You're already thinking about thriving again. That takes strength most people don't have. I found myself staring at him, really looking at him for the first time since he'd rescued me. He'd been unfailingly kind, patient with my fears, respectful of my boundaries even while setting necessary limits. He'd given me safety when I had none, purpose when I felt lost, And now he was giving me the chance to reclaim my agency in the most dangerous way possible. "Thank you," I said quietly, "for all of this. I know I haven't been the most grateful guest." "You've been perfect," he interrupted. "Difficult, occasionally, but perfect in your honesty. I'd rather deal with someone who fights me when they disagree than someone who pretends compliance while planning to run. Have people run from your protection before?" Something dark flickered in his eyes. "Once. She thought she could handle her situation alone, that my methods were too extreme. She made it 2 weeks before her enemies found her." He paused. I was too late to save her that time. The pain in his voice suggested more than just professional failure. "You cared about her." "I did. Not romantically. She was like a sister to me. But I cared, and I failed her. I've never quite forgiven myself for that." He met my eyes. "Which is why I'm so insistent about your safety, Sloane. I won't lose another person under my protection." The vulnerability in his admission made me see him differently, not just as a powerful criminal who'd rescued me, but as a man carrying his own scars and regrets. At 6:30, Birdie appeared at the study door with a garment bag. "Something appropriate for the meeting," she said, handing it to me. Camden suggested business casual. You want to look professional but not fragile. In my room, I found dark jeans, a charcoal sweater, and a leather jacket that fit perfectly. The clothes felt like armor, helping me slip into the role I needed to play tonight. Not victim, but survivor. Not helpless, but dangerous in my own right. When I came downstairs, Kellen had changed into similar attire. Black jeans, a dark Henley, and a leather jacket that probably cost more than my monthly rent used to. Marcus waited by the door, his face expressionless, but his eyes alert and assessing. "Ready?" Kellen asked. I nodded, my heart pounding, but my resolve firm. "Let's do this." The drive to the warehouse district was tense and silent. I sat in the back of the SUV between Kellen and Marcus, watching the city pass by outside tinted windows. This part of Portland was industrial, all abandoned factories and shipping facilities that had been shuttered when the economy shifted. The Peterson Steel facility loomed against the night sky, a massive structure of concrete and rusted metal. Broken windows stared down like dead eyes, and graffiti covered the lower walls in layers of color and profanity. Camden was waiting outside one of the service entrances, his breath misting in the cold evening air. "They arrived 10 minutes ago. 3 principals plus 4 security. Our team is in position." Kellen nodded, then turned to me. "Last chance to back out." "Not a chance," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. He studied me for a moment, then nodded once. "Stay close to Marcus. Don't speak unless directly addressed, and keep your answers brief. Let me do the negotiating." We entered the warehouse through a side door, our footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. Industrial lighting had been rigged throughout, casting harsh shadows and making the space feel even more threatening. In the center of the main floor, a table had been set up, scarred wood surrounded by mismatched chairs. The 3 men from Camden's photographs sat on one side, their security spread out behind them. They rose as we approached, and I felt the weight of their assessment as they studied me. "Kellen Thorne," Victor Konstantin said, his Russian accent thick. "Thank you for coming. And you brought the girl. How considerate." "Sloane is here as a witness," Kellen said smoothly, gesturing for me to take one of the chairs on our side of the table. Marcus positioned himself directly behind me, his presence solid and reassuring. "She'll confirm that she has no information about Marcus Chen or his stolen assets. After that, we can discuss compensation for the disruption to your operations." "Compensation you will pay us," Dmitri clarified, his scarred face twisting into something that might have been a smile. "For theft of our property and interference in our business." Sloan was never your property, Kellen replied, his voice dropping to something dangerous. She's a civilian who got caught in your incompetent attempt to locate a thief. Your man Darius used my warehouse without authorization, which means any claim you had to her was voided the moment she set foot on my property. Alexei, the grandfatherly one, leaned forward with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Perhaps the young lady could speak for herself. Tell us, Miss Mercer, what did Marcus Chen share with you during your professional relationship? I took a breath, feeling all eyes on me. Nothing beyond the project requirements. He wanted branding for Meridian Holdings. I provided logo concepts, color palettes, marketing materials. Our conversations were strictly professional and entirely documented in email chains. No pillow talk? Victor asked, his tone mocking. No late-night confessions over wine? I never had a personal relationship with him, I said firmly. I never even met him outside of professional contexts. Whatever he stole from you, I know nothing about it. Dimitri pulled out a tablet, turning it toward me. On the screen was a photograph of me having coffee with a man I didn't recognize. Then explain this. You meeting with Chen just days before he disappeared. I leaned forward, studying the image more carefully. The coffee shop was familiar, my usual place near my apartment. But the man sitting across from me wasn't Marcus Chen. He was younger, with different features entirely. That's not Chen, I said. That's Jeremy Morrison, another client. He hired me to design a website for his consulting business. I looked at Kellen. I can prove it. The project files, the invoices, everything is on my laptop. Kellen nodded to Camden, who was standing in the shadows. Within minutes, he'd pulled up my files on his tablet, showing the date stamps and client information that confirmed my story. Victor's expression darkened. Then Darius lied to us. He said Chen confirmed you were his confidant. Darius tortured false information out of a terrified man, Kellen said coldly. That's not my problem. What is my problem is that your incompetence led to an innocent woman being held captive in my warehouse, creating liability that could have traced directly back to me. You want compensation for that? Alexei laughed, the sound empty of humor. You, who has Darius and all our financial records? You, who could destroy us with a phone call to the FBI? You come here demanding we pay you? I'm not demanding anything, Kellen replied. I'm explaining reality. Sloan Mercer is under my protection. Anyone who touches her, threatens her, or continues to pursue her answers to me. In exchange for that protection, I'm willing to forget the $100,000 bounty you put on her head and the inconvenience of having to clean up your mess. The three men conferred in rapid Russian, their voices rising as the discussion grew heated. Finally, Victor turned back to us. We want proof, he demanded. Proof that she doesn't have Chen's data hidden somewhere. Let us search her apartment, her possessions, her digital accounts. No, I said before Kellen could respond. The word came out harder than intended, fueled by weeks of powerlessness, finally giving way to fury. You don't get access to my life because you're too incompetent to find your own thief. I don't have your data. I don't know where Chen is. And I'm done being treated like property in a transaction. Silence fell over the warehouse. Even Kellen looked surprised at my vehemence. Victor stood slowly, his hand moving toward his jacket. Marcus tensed behind me, and suddenly the warehouse was alive with movement. Camden's men emerging from the shadows, the triad security reaching for weapons, everyone suspended in a moment of hair-trigger tension. Enough! Kellen's voice cut through the chaos. Sloan has answered your questions. You have no legitimate claim to her, no evidence she possesses anything of yours. This meeting is over. Not until we get satisfaction, Dimitri growled. Kellen pulled out his phone, tapping the screen several times. I just sent the first batch of your financial records to the FBI's Organized Crime Division. In 30 minutes, the rest follows, unless we leave here without incident. Your choice. Walk away and rebuild, or fight and lose everything. The threat hung in the air, absolute and terrifying in its simplicity. I watched the three men calculate, weighing their options against the certain destruction Kellen offered. Finally, Alexei raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. You've made your point. The girl is yours. We'll call off the bounty and spread word that she's off limits. Smart decision, Kellen said. He stood, offering me his hand. Sloan? I took it, letting him help me to my feet. My legs shook, but I kept my head high as we walked toward the exit. Behind us, I could hear the Triad's furious Russian conversation, but no one tried to stop us. Only when we were safely in the SUV, pulling away from the warehouse, did I allow myself to collapse against the seat. Adrenaline drained away, leaving me hollow and shaking. You did well, Kellen said quietly. Very well. I thought they were going to kill us all, I admitted. They might have tried, but Camden's positioning was solid, and the Triad knows I don't bluff. When I threaten to release their financial records, I mean it. He studied me in the dim light from passing streetlights. How do you feel? I considered the question. I'd faced my captors, or at least their employers. I'd spoken my truth, reclaimed some measure of my own voice. It should have felt satisfying, victorious even. Instead, I just felt tired. Bone-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with physical fatigue, and everything to do with the realization that this would be my life now. Always looking over my shoulder, always dependent on Kellen's protection, always aware that people existed who saw me as a means to an end, rather than a person. I feel ready to go home, I said finally, then paused. Except I don't know where home is anymore. Kellen's hand found mine in the darkness between us, his grip warm and solid. Home is wherever you're safe. For now, that's with me. And that's okay. As the SUV wound through the Portland streets toward Kellen's house in the West Hills, I realized he was right. I didn't have to figure out everything tonight, didn't have to solve the impossible question of how to rebuild a normal life from the ashes of the old one. For now, I could just exist in this moment, safe, protected, and slowly healing under the watch of a man who'd promised to keep me alive no matter the cost. The future would come soon enough. Tonight, that was enough. 3 weeks after the meeting at Peterson Steel, I stood in the library on the second floor of Kellen's house, arranging design samples for a client presentation. The room had become my office, my sanctuary, the place where I could rebuild some semblance of professional identity. True to his word, Kellen had set me up with Camden's property management company. I'd spent the past 2 weeks staging 3 residential properties and creating branding materials for a new commercial development. The work was challenging, creative, and blessedly normal. Exactly what I needed to feel like myself again. Through the window, I could see Marcus walking the perimeter of the grounds, his vigilance never wavering despite the calm that had settled over my life since the confrontation with the Triad. The bounty had been officially withdrawn. Word had spread through Portland's criminal networks that Sloan Mercer was under Kellen Thorne's protection, and life had achieved something approaching routine. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that this peace was temporary, a breath between storms. A soft knock at the library door interrupted my thoughts. Kellen entered, carrying 2 mugs of coffee and wearing the casual clothes I'd come to associate with his time at home. Jeans and a gray sweater that softened the hard edges of his features. "How's the presentation coming?" he asked, setting 1 mug beside my laptop. "Well, the clients love the staging concept for the Aurora Heights property. I think we'll close the deal this afternoon." I accepted the coffee gratefully, noting that he'd made it exactly how I liked it. 2 sugars, splash of cream. He'd been paying attention to these small details, making mental notes of my preferences and accommodating them without being asked. "That's 4 successful projects in 2 weeks. Camden's impressed with your work." Kellen settled into one of the leather armchairs near my desk, his long legs stretched out in front of him. How are you feeling? Really? It was a question he asked regularly, always genuinely interested in the answer. I'd learned to be honest with him because evasion only made him more persistent. Better. Not healed, but better. I'm sleeping more consistently. The nightmares are less frequent. I turned to face him fully. I actually feel like I'm building something again, not just surviving day to day. Something warm flickered in his gray eyes. Good. That's what I'd hoped for. We'd fallen into this pattern over the past weeks. Conversations that started professional and drifted into something more personal. Moments of comfortable silence that felt increasingly intimate. Glances that lingered just a beat too long. I'd caught myself watching him during breakfast, noticing the way he listened with complete focus when I spoke, how he moved through the world with such controlled power. It was dangerous territory, developing feelings for a man whose protection had saved my life, but whose world had nearly destroyed it. Yet I couldn't seem to stop the slow shift from gratitude to something warmer, more complicated. I've been thinking, I said, setting down my coffee cup. About what comes next. I can't live here indefinitely, Kellen. At some point, I need to reclaim actual independence. His expression closed off slightly, the shutters coming down. We discussed 3 weeks. It's been 3 weeks. Are you saying you want to leave? I'm saying I need to understand what my options are. Can I go back to my apartment? Find a new place? Or am I permanently under guard? Kellen was quiet for a long moment, his fingers steepled beneath his chin in a gesture I'd learned meant he was choosing his words carefully. The immediate threat has been neutralized. The triad has backed off, and there's been no movement on Marcus Chen. He's presumably established a new life somewhere that doesn't interfere with Portland operations. Theoretically, you could resume a normal life. Theoretically, I repeated, catching the qualifier. But practically, you'll always be known as someone under my protection. That comes with certain complications. Anyone who wants to send me a message, anyone who thinks they can gain leverage over me, might see you as an opportunity. He met my eyes directly. I won't lie to you, Sloan. Complete independence means complete vulnerability. The question is whether you're willing to accept that risk. The honesty was both appreciated and devastating. He was right. I'd been marked by my association with him. Even if I left, even if I built a new life somewhere else, there would always be people who remembered that Kellen Thorne had claimed me as his. What if I stayed? The question emerged before I'd fully processed the thought. Not as a guest or someone under protection, but as something else. Kellen's stillness was absolute, like a predator scenting prey. What are you asking, Sloan? I don't know exactly. I stood, needing to move, to think. These past 3 weeks, living here, working for your company, existing in your world, it's felt more stable than my life ever was before. The irony isn't lost on me that a criminal's protection feels safer than normal society did. There's a reason for that, Kellen said quietly. In your world, people pretend at civility while hiding their true intentions. In mine, we're honest about our violence. You always know where you stand. I turned to face him, leaning against my desk. And where do I stand with you? Really? He rose from the chair, crossing the space between us with that fluid grace that still made my breath catch. He stopped just close enough for me to feel his body heat, smell the cedar and leather scent that had become so familiar. You want honesty? His voice had dropped to that dangerous register that made my pulse race. You're under my skin, Sloan Mercer. You have been since I found you in that warehouse, broken but defiant. I've watched you heal, watched you reclaim your strength. And every day I want more. More of your time, your thoughts, your trust. more than I have any right to want. My heart hammered against my ribs. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you stay, it won't be as a guest or an employee or someone I'm protecting out of obligation. It will be because I want you here, in my space, in my life. His hand came up to cup my face, thumb brushing across my cheekbone with devastating gentleness. But that scares you as much as it attracts you, doesn't it? I couldn't deny it. The truth was written in how I leaned into his touch, even as part of me wanted to flee. You're dangerous, Kellen. Not just your world, but you specifically. You have the power to destroy me in ways that have nothing to do with violence. I know. And you have the same power over me, which terrifies me more than I care to admit. His forehead rested against mine, our breath mingling in the small space between us. So, we're at an impasse, both of us wanting something we're afraid to reach for. The library door burst open, Camden's voice cutting through the intimate moment. Kellen, we have a situation. We stepped apart immediately, the spell broken. Kellen's expression shifted back to professional calm, though I saw the regret in his eyes. What kind of situation? Camden glanced at me, then back to Kellen. Marcus Chen. He's resurfaced, and he's asking for Sloane specifically. The bottom dropped out of my stomach. What? He contacted us through intermediaries an hour ago. He claims he has information about why Sloane was really taken, information that exonerates her of any involvement, but he'll only share it with her directly. Camden's expression was grim. He's proposing a meeting. Tomorrow. Neutral ground. Absolutely not, Kellen said immediately. It's obviously a trap. Maybe, Camden agreed. But if he really does have information about the original kidnapping, we need to know what it is. It could be the final piece that ensures Sloane's complete safety. I found my voice. I'll do it. Both men turned to stare at me. Kellen's expression was incredulous. You'll do no such thing. Chen is the reason you spent 6 weeks in captivity. There's no way I'm letting you anywhere near him. It's not your decision, I said, finding a core of steel I'd thought was lost in that warehouse. Chen reached out to me specifically. If he has information that matters, I deserve to hear it directly. Sloane, no. I cut him off. You said you wanted me to reclaim my agency, to stop being a victim. This is what that looks like, Kellen. Making my own decisions about situations that directly affect my life. The muscle in his jaw ticked, a sign of his barely controlled frustration. This isn't about agency. It's about not walking into an obvious trap set by a man who's already betrayed everyone he's worked with. Then come with me, I challenged. Bring your security. Set up the meeting on your terms. Control every variable. But don't shut me out of this. Camden watched our exchange with interest, his sharp eyes missing nothing. Actually, her presence might be an advantage. Chen specified Sloane, which means he wants something from her specifically. We can use that. Kellen's eyes remained locked on mine, and I could see the war playing out across his features, the need to protect me battling against his respect for my autonomy. Finally, he nodded once, sharply. Fine. But we do this my way, with every precaution in place. And if at any point I determine the risk is too high, we abort. Agreed? Agreed, I said, relief and terror mixing in equal measure. The rest of the day passed in intensive planning. Camden laid out security protocols, escape routes, communication signals. Marcus would be my personal shadow, with 4 other men positioned throughout the meeting location. Kellen would be present, but positioned where Chen would see him as a threat if anything went wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered downstairs around 2 in the morning, finding my way to the kitchen for water. The house was quiet except for the soft sounds of security cameras rotating and the distant hum of the security system. I was leaning against the counter, staring out at the darkened gardens, when Kellen appeared in the doorway. He wore sleep pants and a t-shirt, his hair mussed from pillow, looking more human than I'd ever seen him. "Can't sleep?" he asked, his voice rough with rest. Too much adrenaline, too many thoughts. I turned to face him. "Tell me honestly, do you think Chen is going to try something tomorrow?" Kellen moved into the kitchen, pouring himself water from the same pitcher I'd used. "I think Chen is a coward and a thief who's realized he needs leverage to survive in this world. Whether that means information or something more dangerous, I can't say. But you'll be ready." "I'm always ready." He set down his glass, studying me in the dim light from the under-cabinet LEDs. "That's not what's really keeping you awake, is it?" I shook my head. "I keep thinking about what you said earlier, about wanting me here, in your life, about us both being scared of what that means." "And have you reached any conclusions?" "Only that I'm tired of letting fear make my decisions." I moved closer to him, drawn by the same gravity that had been pulling me toward him for weeks. "I spent 6 weeks frozen in terror, unable to control anything. I don't want to live like that anymore." Kellen's hand came up to my face again, repeating that gentle gesture from the library. "What do you want, Sloane? Tell me clearly, because I need to hear you say it." "I want to stay, not out of fear or necessity, but because this house, the life you've given me space to build, it feels right. It feels like home." My hand covered his where it rested against my cheek. "I want to explore whatever this is between us, even knowing how complicated and potentially disastrous it could be." His kiss was gentle at first, a question rather than a claim. I answered by pressing closer, my hands sliding up his chest to wrap around his neck. The kiss deepened, became more urgent, carrying weeks of tension and denial and mutual desire finally given permission to exist. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kellen rested his forehead against mine again. "We should take this slow. You're still healing, and I don't want to rush you into something you're not ready for." "I'm not asking to rush anything," I said. "I'm just asking to not hide from it anymore. Whatever happens with Chen tomorrow, whatever complications arise from choosing this life with you, I want to face it together instead of pretending there's nothing between us." "Together," Kellen repeated, as if testing the word. Then he smiled, a genuine expression of warmth that transformed his entire face. "I can work with that." We stood in the kitchen for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, not speaking, but not needing to. Outside, the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky beyond the windows. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own dangers. But for now, I let myself exist in this moment of peace, choosing to believe that sometimes the most dangerous thing, allowing yourself to trust someone with your heart, was also the bravest. The meeting with Marcus Chen was scheduled for noon at a restaurant in the Pearl District, public enough to discourage violence, private enough for serious conversation. Kellen had arranged for a back room, with Camden's team positioned throughout the building, and Marcus never more than 3 feet from my side. Chen arrived precisely on time, looking nothing like the polished businessman who'd hired me months ago. He'd lost weight, his expensive suit hanging loose on a frame that suggested stress and sleepless nights. His eyes darted constantly, assessing threats, calculating angles. "Miss Mercer," he said, nodding to me as he took the seat across from us. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." "You demanded the meeting," I pointed out. "I'm here because you claim to have information. So talk." Chen glanced at Kellen, who lounged in his chair with deceptive casualness. "I'd hoped we could speak privately." "Not going to happen," Kellen said flatly. "You get Sloane in a public setting with her security present, or you get nothing. Your choice." Chen sighed, seeming to deflate slightly. "Fine. I suppose it doesn't matter who hears this now. He pulled out a tablet, sliding it across the table toward me. Those are the real files from Meridian Holdings, the ones I should have given you for the branding project but didn't because they were too incriminating. I opened the files, scanning through designs and documents that were similar to what I'd worked with, but subtly different. Account numbers were visible in some images, names and transaction details in others. All the information someone would need to understand the full scope of the money laundering operation. I never gave you these files, Chen continued. I gave you sanitized versions, safe images with no identifying information. But I told the Triad I'd given you everything, hoping they'd believe you were an insurance policy, that if anything happened to me, you could expose their operation. Understanding dawned cold and terrible. You used me as a shield without my knowledge or permission. Yes. To his credit, Chen looked genuinely ashamed. I needed them to believe I'd created a dead man's switch, someone who could destroy them if they came after me. It was supposed to keep us both safe. Instead, it got me kidnapped for 6 weeks, I said, fury burning through me. Starved, restrained, threatened, nearly sold to human traffickers, all because of a lie you told to save your own skin. I'm sorry, Chen said, and he sounded like he meant it. I didn't think they'd actually take you. I thought the threat would be enough to make them leave both of us alone. By the time I learned what had happened, you were already in that warehouse, and I had no way to help you without exposing myself. Kellen leaned forward, his voice deadly quiet. Why come forward now? Why reveal the truth when you've been safely hiding for months? Because the Triad won't let it go, Chen admitted. They still believe Sloan has information, still see her as a liability. I've been getting feelers, inquiries about whether I'd be willing to confirm or deny her involvement. He looked at me directly. I couldn't live with the knowledge that my lie was keeping you in danger. So I'm here to set the record straight, to provide proof that you never had any damaging information. In exchange for what? I asked, because there was always a price. Protection, Chen said simply. From Kellen, if he's willing to extend it. The same deal Sloan got, a chance to rebuild without constantly looking over my shoulder. Kellen laughed, the sound cold and without humor. You expect me to protect the man whose lies nearly got Sloan killed? The man who spent months in hiding while she dealt with the consequences of his choices? I expect you to be pragmatic, Chen countered. With my testimony and these files, you can completely exonerate Sloan in the eyes of anyone who matters. No more questions about her involvement. No more suspicion. Isn't that worth one more person under your protection? The calculation was written clearly across Kellen's face. Chen was right. His testimony would definitively close this chapter of my life, ensure that no one could ever claim I'd been involved in the original theft. What do you think? Kellen asked me, surprising both Chen and myself. It's your life this affects most directly. Do we take the deal? I studied Marcus Chen, this weak, cowardly man whose selfishness had derailed my entire existence. Part of me wanted to deny him, to let him face the consequences of his choices alone. But another part, the part that had learned to think strategically during my captivity, saw the value in his offer. I want a full written confession, I said finally. Every detail of your theft, your lies, your dealings with the Triad. I want proof that completely separates me from your crimes. You provide that, and I'll support Kellen offering you protection. Chen nodded eagerly. Done. I can have everything documented within the hour. And you work for me, Kellen added, his tone making it clear this wasn't a suggestion. Legitimate work, proper compensation, but your skills in financial manipulation will be useful for ensuring my operations stay clean. Consider it the price of continued breathing. Acceptable, Chen agreed. 3 hours later, with Chen's confession filed away and copies distributed to enough people to ensure its authenticity couldn't be questioned, I stood in Kellen's study, feeling like a weight I'd been carrying for months had finally lifted. "It's done," Kellen said, pouring us both a celebratory scotch despite the afternoon hour. "You're completely clear. No more questions, no more threats, no more looking over your shoulder." I accepted the glass, taking a sip of the smooth alcohol. "So what now? I'm free to go if I want, free to rebuild my life however I choose?" "Yes." Kellen set down his glass and moved to stand before me. "You have complete freedom, Sloan. No obligations, no expectations. You can stay or go as you wish." The choice stretched before me: return to my old life, or embrace this new one I'd begun building in Kellen's world. It should have been a difficult decision, weighing safety against independence, love against freedom. Instead, it was the easiest choice I'd ever made. "I'm staying," I said, setting my own glass aside. "Not because I need your protection anymore, but because I want to be here. Because somewhere in the chaos of the worst weeks of my life, I found something I didn't expect: a home, a purpose, and a man who makes me want to be brave enough to risk my heart again." Kellen's smile was slow and devastating. "Then welcome home, Sloan Mercer, for as long as you want to stay." He kissed me then, and I kissed him back with the certainty of someone who'd finally stopped running from fear and started running toward life. Whatever complications lay ahead, whatever challenges came from choosing a life intertwined with a man like Kellen Thorne, I'd face them with eyes open and heart engaged. I'd been broken in that warehouse. But here, in this house, with this complicated, dangerous, surprisingly gentle man, I'd found a way to rebuild myself into someone stronger than I'd been before. Not despite what had happened to me, but because of it. Because surviving had taught me the difference between existing and truly living. And I was finally ready to live.